Many things going on.
So Bob, let me know when you want me to
Yeah,
start. We have 83 people. That's good.
really good. Okay, why don't you go ahead and get started? I'll put the PowerPoint back up on the screen.
Okay. Good afternoon, Niska. Welcome to our presentation. I am Dr. Gail Reed Barnett. I am the Professional Development Chair, as well as the former president of NYSCA, New York State School Counselors Association. I'd like to welcome each and every one of you, and I have to give a special shout out to my class 643, which I will see them at 5 p.m. This evening. And I'd like to also give a special shout out to our two guests that will be speaking on social, emotional inequity. Carrie, I hope I'm pronouncing it correctly, Manchester, and Victor Ross. Miss Manchester, she's associate in the New York State Education Department called NYSET. And Mr. Rose is a licensed clinical social worker, school counselor, master credential, alcoholism, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. Your CV is almost long as mine, Mr. Rose. Anyway, welcome. And Bob will take it away, who is our executive director, and Marjorie is on our committee, the PD committee. I don't see anyone else. But as we listen to the presentation, questions will be asked and answered after the presentation. So Bob, is all yours.
Thank you, Carrie and Victor. You can start whenever you'd like, and you should be able to share your screens.
And I'm not going to share right away because this is social emotional learning. So let's practice before we get into slides and talking by just, engaging in a little bit of a mindful transition into this. So I would invite you, to the extent that you're comfortable, to just take a moment to notice your feet on the floor, your seat in the chair. Maybe take a moment to notice what kind of energy you're bringing into this hour, how the day has gone so far, what maybe is on that to-do list that you didn't quite get to, because that's sort of the nature of our to-do lists all the time, right? We end the day not having done all the things we wanted to. Like, can we, for the next hour or so, just let that go and be, and a moment to just let your awareness move through your body from the top of your head all the way down to your feet on the floor, and notice any places where you might be holding a little tension or a little stress, and you might opt to do a little self-massage if you find there's some tension in the shoulders or the jaw, or maybe a stretch. And then see if you can find a place in your body that you feel contentment, that you feel ease. We're quick to find the places of discomfort. Can you find a place of comfort? Just take a moment to let your awareness rest in that spot. Might and opt out of this one if you're in the midst of a cold or flu season right now, but you might opt to take a couple of big deep breaths all the way into the bottom of the lungs so that you feel the belly expand, and then into the center of the lungs so the rib cage expands, and finally all the way into the top of the lungs so that the collarbones lift, and then let it all release from the collarbones, then rib cage, then belly. Take one more biggest breath that you've taken all day into the belly, ribs, and chest. And exhale, chest, ribs, and belly. And we find ourselves here. So welcome. Thank you all for being here. I would love it if you could take a moment to drop in the chat where you're coming from and something that made you smile today, some point of joy, however large or small, from a really good cup of coffee to, an awesome sledding party in the backyard. So I will say that one thing that made me smile this morning was getting up and going to the kitchen and looking out over the window over the sink and seeing my husband and my dog running around in the backyard having a blast in the snow. Yeah, I see Albany, New York with my new puppy. Yes, our puppy is not very new anymore, but she's still very much our puppy. Thank you all. Yeah, I see lots of dogs and my students. I love that one. Snacks. Yep, sledding in the backyard. Great. A 2-hour delay, a little extra time this morning. Oh, I'm glad so many people love the snow and tea. I'm with you on the tea. I've got mine here. All right. Thank you for that, everyone. And if you haven't yet, keep going on ahead. I'm going to jump in so that we make the best use of our time today. Let me share my screen. And all right. So let me just quick go over what we're going to do today. I'm going to start with, we grounded ourselves personally. I'm going to ground us a little bit in social emotional learning under the Collaborative for Academic, Social, and Emotional Learning's definition, or CASEL's definition. And I know that's going to be review for a lot of folks on this call, but it's just an opportunity to get us all on the same page to get started. And then I'm going to turn it over to Victor to talk about some of the regulatory requirements that address social emotional learning and what that might look like for you all. And then I'm going to come back in and talk to you about the key shifts in our revised social emotional learning benchmarks to be more explicitly equity focused. So I anticipate that this is a very familiar image, so I won't spend a lot of time on it. But I will read through the revised CASEL definition, because if it's been a while since you took the time to go onto CASEL's website and read how they define social emotional learning, that shifted a couple of years ago when they made their transition to be more explicitly equity focused. So the new definition reads as follows. Social and emotional learning is an integral part of education and human development. SEL is the process through which all young people and adults acquire and apply the knowledge, skills, and attitudes to develop healthy identities, manage emotions, and achieve personal and collective goals, feel and show empathy for others, establish and maintain supportive relationships, and make responsible and caring decisions. SEL advances educational equity and excellence through authentic school, family, community partnerships to establish learning environments and experiences that feature trusting and collaborative relationships, rigorous and meaningful curriculum and instruction, and ongoing evaluation. SEL can help address various forms of inequity and empower young people and adults to co-create thriving schools and contribute to safe, healthy, and just communities. So we see in the very center of the circle, the 5 core competencies are intrapersonal competencies of self-awareness and self-management in orange. In green, the social awareness and relationship skills, interpersonal competencies, and finally, responsible decision-making. And how that translates in New York schools, we have one goal for the orange. We have one intrapersonal goal, one for the green, an interpersonal goal, and then responsible decision-making is our third goal. But then we often stop there. We often talk about these 5 core competencies, and we don't really dig into these nesting circles, which are as important as the competencies themselves, because they're critical to creating the school climate and culture where these competencies have the opportunity to thrive, not only for our young people, but for us and for all of the adults in our school communities. So this is happening within our classrooms, through instruction, through school climate. This is happening school-wide. It's part of the culture, ideally, of course, and the practices and the policies like restorative practices, or how we address discipline, how we train our bus drivers and the folks who are working in our cafeterias. This is happening for families and caregivers. So we've got a back and forth communication, and we're incorporating families in our decision-making, ideally. And then finally, our greater community. So how are we leveraging the resources in the community to support all of this work? So that's what it is. What it means, I think, is something we each need to kind of sort out for ourselves. When I come to the what it means, I end up coming back to a quote from a mindfulness teacher that I'm really partial to. Her name is Ruth King, and she writes may our words and actions be ceremonies of well-being for all of humanity. And then I distill that a little bit more down to, how do we just love each other better? How do we just do a better job of loving ourselves and sending that compassion outward? So that's what it means to me. It doesn't need to mean that exactly to you, but I would encourage you all to think about how this sits with you and what space this holds in your practice, in your personal practice, and in your practice with young people. So moving forward with this as our foundation for our conversation, I'm going to turn things over to Victor to talk to you a little bit about regulatory requirements. And Victor, I'll move the slides ahead for you.
Thank you, Carrie. All right. So just reviewing our New York State Education Commissioner's regulation, which is subdivision J of the Part 100.2 regulation, which was amended in 2017 in order to kind of embed in it that students, well, each school and district should have a comprehensive developmental school counseling program, and that students really should have access to a school counselor, as well as, other professionals, but that this plan should be led and driven by a school counselor. And when you, guidance from this really broke the regulation down into 4 sections: the program, the services, the plan, and the advisory council. And Carrie, go ahead. So the commissioner's regulation, as I said, embeds that every school should have a comprehensive developmental school counseling / guidance program, which is referred to as the program. All kids K through 12, which at one point was 6 through 12, right? But K through 12 should have access to a certified school counselor. And the program should address multiple areas. And these areas look very, very familiar because these are similar and aligned to the ASCA model: college and career readiness, academics, and social emotional development. Go ahead, Carrie. So the program requires those multiple competencies. And the SEL benchmarks is really a great way to meet these competencies. It can serve as a framework to develop that comprehensive program. And it can complement or supplement your existing SEL program. So this looks different from school to school. For some people, they build their program, their SEL, their school counseling program around an SEL framework that works for them. And they're teacher-led, and sometimes the counselor will co-teach, sometimes the counselor will supplement using their own lesson planning. So it varies from school to school and district to district, but the SEL benchmarks can most certainly serve as this kind of foundation or jumping off point for many schools. Next slide, Carrie. Right, so as we've developed our program, we think about our services. Again, very, very similar to language, very similar to our ASCA model, right? Thinking about those indirect services that schools can provide. An important part of the SEL benchmarks that I think about, right, as a school professional is that it can often feel like a heavy lift. And an important part is that it shouldn't, or it doesn't have to. And the one way that we can think about that is really integrating it into the existing curriculums that we have, right? ELA, Social Studies, Health, Family, Consumer Science, right, as just examples. But it doesn't necessarily have to be separate and distinct, and shouldn't be separate and distinct from these classes, right? They should really be integrated and embedded. So indirectly, we might consult with teachers about how to integrate these SEL benchmarks into the core curriculum. Directly, we might teach or co-teach SEL lessons, facilitate small groups, right? Things that we're doing directly with students, but we don't have to do this alone. Next slide, Carrie. The plan really should be a team approach. Right, led by the certified school counselor in developing the program, but also in collaboration with the advisory council or other stakeholders. And other stakeholders might include your other student services professionals, like your school counselors, nurses, school psychologists, including family members, community members, community organizations. A lot of schools have CBOs that are attached to them. Right, so this is important that as many stakeholders as possible are brought to the table, because again, we're trying to integrate SEL really into every facet of the school community. Next slide, Carrie. And then the advisory council. Every district should have an advisory council that includes even our New York City schools, which is usually what's seen as one big district, but each district superintendent should have an advisory group that composes of multiple stakeholders, and they're expected to convene 2 times a year to meet. And the purpose is to really review the comprehensive developmental school counseling program and provide advice on its implementation. Right, so we're not writing this in isolation and shouldn't be writing it in isolation. We should be doing it in consultation with other people, looking at data, as well as the input that other people might have in this program. So I think my takeaways and the important part that I think I would share is really thinking about how do you leverage the other professionals and other people in the school community to help with integrating SEL, and especially utilizing the SEL benchmarks into your school community is really just using a much more team approach. And I believe that I'm going to turn it back over to Carrie.
All right, thank you. And feel free to interrupt me if you think of things while I'm talking too. So moving, we talked a little bit about the framework from CASEL and what's required. I want to start to move into what made us make these shifts in the benchmarks and how we did that. And I'd like to start with this idea of transformative SEL, which largely came from Rob Jagers and his research partners through CASEL. And transformative SEL is a form of applied SEL, where we use this for young people and adults to be able to build the kind of strong and lasting and respectful relationships that allow for the facilitation of co-learning in a safe and stable container, so that there's an opportunity to really look critically at what are these root causes of the inequity that exists in our classroom or school or community or society, and to be able to work together to develop collaborative solutions around that. Eventually, the hope is that we lead to personal, community, and social well-being or greater well-being. And if you're seeing some connections to our civic readiness initiative, yay, because that's exactly what I saw when I heard this. How do we get to better communities, stronger communities? So transformative SEL takes the 5 competencies and does these competency extensions or elaborations. And so the elaboration for self-awareness is identity, for self-management is agency, for social awareness is belonging. And then you see, you can see it on the screen. I don't need to read it all. But it's important to understand that these elaborations are not only in those competencies, right? If I look at what builds my identity, it's not all about my self-awareness. It's about my family, it's about my community, it's about my culture, it's about my gender, it's about my sexual orientation, it's about my race. It's about all of these things, all of these facets that make up who I am. And so the revised benchmarks bring a heavy focus to particularly identity, agency, and belonging. That's where you'll see the language come in. And then the collaborative problem solving and curiosity is sort of the methodology. How do we dig into all of this? So with identity, being able to understand all of these multifaceted personal and social group statuses. So thinking about intersectionality and positionality, and how can we help to foster that, not just around our young people. This is about us too. How do we create our own practice that we can then model, that we're then ready to teach? With agency, how do we create these spaces for young people to have opportunities to take action, to make choices, to impact their own trajectory in school and life? And then belonging, how do we build these spaces that allow for all of this to happen? How do we create communities that are welcoming, with an understanding that that's a big hurdle out there right now, right? Like, it's hard out there, and we've got a lot of we're struggling to figure out how to communicate with each other well. So it's understood that's a heavy lift. All right. So reasons we wanted to revise the benchmarks. One, we released our initial benchmarks in 2018. That was before CASEL updated their language. So the language that we had based them on was then out of date. 2, we knew some things about our benchmarks even as we released them. We understood that we hadn't done, we'd done some work towards equity, but we understood that there were places that we hadn't dug in as far as we could. And we knew that we had an opportunity to expand on adult SEL and how that impacts our practice and how that impacts our young people's well-being. So we put together a stakeholder group that included folks from the field, from across the state, different roles in schools and communities, young people, parents, and we also brought together people from inside the state education department who were working on aligned work. So the folks that were working on culturally responsive, sustaining education practices, the folks that were working on the civic readiness initiative, people from special education, from family and community engagement. And we brought everybody in the same space to try to think about how do we build social emotional learning that supports all of the work that we're doing. How do we make this all what it really is? Because these are all facets of us trying to get to a better education for young people. They're not separate, and yet we often work in ways that keep them separate. So if you take away 4 things from this hour with us, But these 4 key shifts are identity, agency, belonging, and adult practice. Right. So we went into this conversation with our group with some guiding questions, and we had some help from WestEd, who has a U.S. Department of Education contract to help support states in the Northeast. So they were able to come in and help us facilitate these conversations. So these are our big overarching questions that we went back to at every meeting and tried to draw the conversation back to these ideas. How do we foster equity? How do we bring in identity, agency, belonging? And how do we do that within those concentric circles outside the competencies, right? So thinking about this, not just as classroom practice, but what does this look like in all school settings and community settings? And so our goal 1, SCD's goal 1, and I will show you these on one of the next slides, is the intrapersonal one. So self-awareness, and then how we take that awareness of ourselves, our emotions, and apply that understanding to decision-making and intentional behaviors. So these are the questions that we went into as we went line by line through the old benchmarks and said, what here could serve young people better? What here might be harmful? And made those shifts. So I want to do a little bit of interaction here. So here you see our original goal 1 and our revised goal 1. And here's what we're going to do, and I'll explain all the steps before we jump into it. I'm going to invite you to take a moment in silence and just read through these and let the words sit with you and notice any words that stand out, anything that resonates for you, whether that's positively or negatively or otherwise. And then notice how those things that pop out for you impact your emotions. And maybe try to notice how that shows up in the body. So the positive noticing might bring some sense of warmth or comfort in the body, or maybe a negative, a negative reaction brings like a scrunching of the eyebrow, just noticing how those things come up. And then what I would ask you to do is to drop in the chat a word or 2 that you noticed. And if you're comfortable, a sensation or a noticing that came along with that word. So at this point, I'm going to be quiet for 1 full minute, and it's going to be really, really hard for me, but I'm going to do it. So I'm just going to take a look at the chat while we're doing this. Thank you all for jumping in on that. I saw a lot of great stuff come up in here. So I saw some noticings around self-awareness and some negative reactions to self-awareness. And you'll notice that was in the original goal and did not show up again in the revised goal. That is a major shift that we made in this revision. What we heard from the field resoundingly was that self-awareness has become coded language for behavior control. And so we opted to frame our language a little bit differently. This is how we take those aspects of self-awareness, how we feel, what we understand about ourselves, and how we apply that to intentional decision-making. It belongs to the individual. It's not about controlling the individual. I saw some comments around empowerment. I saw some positive reactions to the words nurture and affirm in there. I gotta move you over so I can look at the whole thing. And yes, you know, when I did this activity, my words, my negative word that came out was success. And I saw a lot of that, you know, folks were, because what does success mean? Whose definition are we applying here? And again, that's the thing that we pulled out in this revision. And this idea of nurture was a word that really came up for me, because as I thought about it, I'm like, what is to teach, to educate, but to nurture? And if we think about it like that, I think this connection becomes really clear.
And Carrie, can I just briefly, that the term that we that came up for people as self-management was the term we took out. Self-awareness is still there.
Oh, sorry, I didn't realize that's what I said.
Just
Thank
in
you.
case. Yep, no problem.
Thank you. Yes, we took out self-management, not self-awareness. All right. So thank you for playing along. All right. So these are our 3 revised goals, and you'll see that identity, agency, and belonging are all embedded in those. So I'll give you just a moment to look at these and, you know, see if there's other things that jump out for you. All right. Oh, and you're going to get these slides if, yeah, mutually supportive relationships. Thank you, Kelsey. So you will get these slides, so you'll have these to come back to, and they're in the benchmarks anyway. Oh, and I didn't drop that link. I'll drop that link in at the end. So the 4th major shift here beyond identity, agency, belonging was the inclusion of adult indicators. And so if you've spent any time with the new benchmarks, you've seen that those are the first column after the base indicator. So they show up before the early childhood indicators. And the thinking in doing that was to really be explicit that this is the foundational piece before we can move into doing social emotional learning with young people. Because we're all at different places as adults. There is no such thing as mastering social and emotional learning. We all have places that we are more challenged and places that we find more ease. When I talk about this, I often talk about, for me, you know, I have a 20-year yoga practice and almost as long meditation practice. So going in my head and, like, you know, seeing my thoughts and spending time with my mind, that's something that's a little more easeful for me because of all that practice. But then when it comes to self-management, particularly, or self-regulation, if we're not using the term self-management, particularly around conflict resolution, I would rather do almost anything than face a conflict. So that's a place that I struggle, and I have to be very mindful, and I have to be really present with my own uncomfortability, because I can't be an adult and never deal with a conflict. So just an understanding that we're always going to struggle with parts, and there's no such thing as mastering this. I would encourage, if you have not yet dove into the preface language to the new benchmarks, don't skip that. You know, we all have a tendency to jump into the chart and get to these, like, what do we need to do? But there's so much framing in that language. And we really talk about this not being a tool for measurement, not for young people, not for adults. So we know that when we have adults that build strong competencies, that they have better instructional practices, that they have fewer issues with student behavior in their spaces, that they're able to foster a greater sense of belonging. And there is also some hypothesized results of this, that there will be less turnover, we'll have increased mental health, less absenteeism, and likely cost savings. So, keep an eye out for that research down the road when we have a little more information. And so we also know that it's really difficult to practice strong social emotional skills when we are overwhelmed, stressed, burned out, compassion fatigue, when we've practiced for so long and so deeply that it becomes overwhelming. And we know that that's the reality in a lot of our education spaces right now. And that's why I really, really want to say over and over again, this is not a tool for measurement. This is not about mastering competencies. And these competencies are going to be more easily developed and practiced if you can do so in an environment that supports and affirms the identities, the agencies, the belonging of the adults in the school too. These benchmarks for both adults and students, they're about what to work on with self-compassion and grace, not a measure of worth or value or adequacy, and they're not intended to be evaluative, whether that's for staff capabilities or student achievement. See how I'm doing on time? Not doing bad on time, surprisingly. All right. So what I would like us to do at this point is take a moment to go into breakout groups, and I'm not sure can I do that? Who's managing that? What I'd love to do is spend about, let's do 8 minutes in breakout groups of mostly 4s. On these 3 questions. So, and you don't have to answer all of these because there's a lot of questions in here, but what I would like to invite folks to do is do this in a circle. So deciding, let's do reverse alphabetical order to see who goes first. Anyone can pass. And let each person speak for about a minute or 2 about any set of questions that you feel comfortable answering. So strategic vulnerability, you don't have to dig into anything that's uncomfortable, but maybe work to your edge. And then once everyone's had a chance to speak uninterrupted, then take a step back and you can go into some discussion about what came up.
So are you going to do the breakouts?
I can.
Or I can. Let me know.
If you can, that would be great.
Okay. So you want 4 in a room?
About 4 in a room. Obviously, there'll be a few that maybe don't make that, but that's okay.
Okay, cool.
Oh, and I will, right before we jump in, let me model this one too. So.
Okay.
By a few months back, we had a colleague in our office do an activity where we did coworker affirmations, and we all got a poster to put outside our office or cubicle. And everybody else in the office could go around and say what they appreciated about everyone. And when this happened, after a couple of weeks, I had this poster full of all these things that talked about, in many cases, my inner calm. And that's lovely. I'm glad that that's what I'm communicating to people, that's one of my strengths. However, what it also made me realize that maybe there's some opportunity for me to be more transparent about where that calm comes from, because it doesn't come from inner. I promise you, there's not a lot of inner calm in here most of the time. If I am honest, and I often am when I go out and speak to big groups like this, less so when I'm in my own office, my answer is that I came to my yoga practice, I came to my meditation practice to address a generalized anxiety disorder. So my calm is really cultivated, and something that doesn't come particularly easy. So I saw that I had this opportunity to be more open about the path and how these practices were supportive of what was really happening in my life, which is part of why we're doing this work in the first place. So pretty important. And then, are there barriers to growth, and how might I address those barriers? Well, sure. I grew up in the North Country in a very sort of New Englandy, culture where we didn't talk about our feelings a whole lot. So I didn't learn to be very open about these kinds of things. My sister is 5 years apart from me, so I spent a lot of time alone as a child. I was out in the country and there was no one my age. So that also kind of impacted so these are the things that I'm working through in terms of my barriers to growth. And that, plus I'm, an introvert. I love nothing more than an opportunity to work from home on a snowy day. So I'm going to stop talking now and let folks go out and have some conversations of their own.
Okay, I'm gonna click on create and 8 minutes, right?
Yes.
Okay. In all rooms.
Hello. Hello.
Hi, is that Angeline?
Hi, yes, it is.
I'm looking to see where you show up on this list for a room. It looks like you should have gotten an invitation to join a room.
You should be in 16.
You might be able to access it from your toolbar too, if not. I'm also realizing there may be folks who are listening in their car or something who aren't able to
Exactly.
click the buttons, sure. Can you hear talking in the background in my audio?
A little bit.
Okay, hang on, I'm gonna be right back. Sorry about that. Yeah, lessons learned from working at home together.
I'm just laughing because I'm identifying.
Yeah. We're in a different house now, but in our old house, we actually were working on different levels of the house, and he would pace while he was on the phone, and I would get this Doppler effect upstairs.
That's funny. I was on a meeting one time and we have a board member named Christy LeBron. And my granddaughter looks around and looks at my screen and she goes, LeBron James? I still laugh about it. No, not really. Got one room with one person in it. Did I move
Oh
them?
no.
I'm gonna move them
Yeah.
just because I can. The magic. Cool. It worked. Oh, there's a timer at the top. I just saw that.
Yeah,
2:46.
when we hit 2, I'm gonna send, I can see it too, so I'm gonna send a broadcast message at 2 minutes.
I don't think I've tried breakouts with this many people. It's a good test.
And I can see, you can see in there
Yeah.
whose microphones are active. So it looks like there's, with one exception, all of the rooms, somebody's speaking.
Yeah. Room 5 is quiet. Yeah, a lot of people are still at work this time of day.
It's to 5, and the dog's like, it's almost quitting time, right?
Is the benchmarks? I'm looking at a document. Let's see. 12 pages. SEL benchmarks 2022. Is that the one you were going to drop?
It's the PDF on the website.
I got it from the SSS website. Yeah.
Yep.
Here they go. Got 8 minutes to 5.
Got a 1-minute timer, so some folks will keep talking to the end and others won't.
Oh, I see.
Being recorded.
All right, welcome back, everyone. So I'm gonna pull up chat so I can see again. How was that for you? How are your conversations? Oops. Was that difficult or challenging, or did you find that easy? I see insightful, great to connect with others, interact.
It was difficult for me.
Yeah. Yeah, sometimes this can be really challenging because this is asking us to bring pieces of who we are into a space that we don't always take the time to do that, especially with other adults. Good, found commonalities and great to connect with others. So in finding, for folks who found it challenging, was it a positive challenge, or was there a way that could have been more comfortable for you? You don't have to answer, but if you're comfortable answering. It's
Mm.
interesting to hear others also relate to some of the things we overlook. Okay. Yeah, so this can be really interesting when we sit down and have these kind of conversations with people that we're used to having perhaps more utilitarian conversations with about how we're going to get things done or how we're going to move people around. I feel like I'm not alone in some of my struggles. This is amazing. Great, and that's great. And that's why we always offer that opportunity for folks to, you can always pass in circle. That's part of our rules when we do circles, right? Anyone can pass. And we can be as selective as we want about where we're comfortable. And hopefully over time, we have opportunities to build a greater sense of comfort and welcoming in our spaces. So we had time today to do the adult SEL breakout and have some of that conversation. And I knew we weren't going to have time to do 2 breakouts, but I am going to give you the PowerPoint, which has a second set of questions. And so there's a second set of questions around identity, agency, and belonging, and these go a little bit deeper. So I would invite you to take these questions and do some self-reflection on them and to kind of look at them and decide if in your spaces, in your work, there are places where you could bring these questions in and have some conversations with colleagues or, coworkers. And so I guess the last things I want to say before we open up to Q&A are, this is work that counselors have always been doing, that most adults in schools have always been doing on some level. This is bringing more intentionality to it. It's getting more explicit about how we use this as a tool for equity. But it is not something brand new. It is not, it's not something that you don't already have the tools to at least get started in. And it's not something you need to learn overnight. So one thing that I recommend is to sit down with the benchmarks and maybe just look at one a day. Look at the adult competency for one line on Monday and let that sit. I put it in, when I'm learning something, I might put it in my agenda for the day, just that one competency. And then, spend the day thinking about how that shows up in your practice with other adults, with young people, and work through it slowly. It doesn't have to come all at once. And if you try to learn it all at once, as we all know, it's much harder to remember anything if you take in too much at once. And so with that, I would love for us all to take another big deep breath and then maybe do some questions. So I would invite y'all to join me in a big deep inhale all the way into the bottom of the lungs, middle of the lungs, and upper chest, and then exhale top to bottom. I'm going to stop sharing so we can see each other. Does anyone have questions or comments or feedback or suggestions? Open to all of the above.
I'm sorry, what are you talking about benchmarks?
So the benchmarks, let me pull. The benchmarks are New York State's social emotional learning benchmarks. Let me throw a couple of resources here. The first link that I'm going to put in the chat is directly to the benchmarks, and the second one is to the parent page that they are on, which has some other kinds of resources. Oh, and then the third link is a new resource from CASEL that is a module that's an introduction to social emotional learning. So that might not be the right thing for all the folks in the space if you've already dug in pretty deeply to social emotional learning, but it's a great tool for introducing it to others.
Thank you for sharing. Appreciate you.
Absolutely. Thank you. I appreciate all of you. And, I guess that's a good place to end this short of more questions is I am so grateful for all of the work that you all are doing because, we all know we're in the midst of a mental health crisis and you all are out there being the folks to help support our young people. And I'm also aware that you're often the ones supporting the grownups around you too. So thank you for all the work that you're doing. Is the original wheel being replaced? No, because that is CASELS. That is Collaborative for Academic Social Emotional Learning. And for right now, it did get revised a little when they made the change. There used to be only 3 rings on the outside. Now there's a 4th ring, but that will stay as is. It is New York's interpretation of how we put that into benchmarks that shifted. Thank you, Erin. Thank you, Catherine. Thank you, Donna. Thank you, Juanita. Appreciate you all.
Can I ask a question, Carrie?
Absolutely.
So it's fun to meet you. I was contacting you on behalf of Niska. It's nice to meet you.
Nice to meet you too.
So, question. So the transformative SEL, when did that like come about? Because we've been using the SEL framework and CASEL for a while. I just want to know, like, was this something like newer or was
It
this...
is newer, yeah.
Got it.
So I was trying to think when the first kind of initial paper came out. That might have been 2019.
Mhm.
And then the more intensive research, I think, was 2020 and 2021. So the competency elaborations that I showed you, that research that came out of was 2021. So pretty new.
Got it. And I'm assuming this has all been like worked in from different counselors, or where do you guys get your information directly from counselors, or like how do you come up with the transformative part to it? Because as many counselors are still here, like how we're always busy, we're always trying to do stuff, we're always moving around. How have other counselors been able to put this into their practice on a day-to-day basis if they don't have that chance to like slow down? Just a question.
Well, and I kind of come back to one, start with the adult practice, has that happened, and have a clear understanding of what your own comfortability with the adult indicators is, because you're going to look at them and you're going to find that some of them are the things you find useful and the things you find challenging. Start with that. And then just go slow, just work it in at whatever speed you can work within the confines of, your particular situation and workload. Yeah.
Thank you.
Hey, Kathy, I noticed that there's a lot of DI infused in what we just discussed. Were the changes made because the New York State adopted the new DI policy, or was the change already planned to happen?
Yes and yes. Yeah, so the change was already planned, and then the culturally responsive sustaining education happened and the DEI framework happened, and those really grounded us in some shared language that we then incorporated here. So all things are true.
So would you then say it's important for counselors to become familiar with the new DEI framework, or at least with the 4 core DEI frameworks?
I mean, when you look at that DEI document, the 2 documents, they're not that long. Personally, I think everybody should read them. I think they're extremely helpful to understanding what our sort of vision is for moving forward and serving our students better.
Thank you.
Are there any more questions for Carrie or for Victor? Well, on behalf of our professional development committee, and I want to give a special shout out to Michael, who was the person who had asked Carrie and Victor to do this presentation. As you can see, these are the members on our committee. And if anyone would like to join the committee, I'm just throwing a little plug in there. You're welcome to NYSCA.org is our website. We will have future webinars coming up. Please stay tuned. We have everybody's email. Each one teach one. This professional development was very educational, very informational. And we'll be looking forward to seeing or receiving the PowerPoint piece on it. Again, I'd like to thank each and every one of you for joining. I think he's a former student of mine. I know I gave him a shout out last time, Patrick Kirby.
I am here. This was very good. Thank you.
Thank you. Class 643, as soon as we leave this webinar, we'll be starting our class. So I will see you in a couple of minutes. You can take 2 minutes and we'll see you in class. Bob, thank you so much for the technology. NYSCA members, I know that you're out there. I saw quite a few. I saw Gloria Jean, who's one of our former members. Janisha, I see Janisha's there. It's like too many to call. Marie, I mean, you guys know who you are. Thank you again, and we hope to see you in a couple of weeks at our next webinar. Have a great week, and remember, somebody out there loves you.
Thank you. Excellent PD.